Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about government policy and human rights. Welcome back to Policy and Rights here on Depictions Media Radio. I'm your host, Michael Clogs. In this next show, we're going to hear a brief report on from the United Nations about Russia and their accusations of sabotage and who was behind the sabotage in a stakeout done by one of the permanent representatives for the Russian Federation. Of course, they are accusing Western countries and countries that belong to NATO of this sabotage and saying that it's being done, of course, to continue and prolong the war that is happening in Ukraine. While we're on the topic of war, and let's look at the children of war, we have a report from, and we're going to hear comments about that report from Virginia Gambia in a press conference that she did on the topic is 2022 more children tragically impacted by hostilities. Bold and resolute actions need to give all children the future they deserve. And she's talking about especially the children that are caught up in armed conflict, wars, and some of the things that hit the top of the list, and some of the things that actually declined. Well, while India was on the decline, that conflicts in Palestine were on the incline, and without doing a whole lot of finger pointing and everything, that they have a list of countries that should be watched, and Israel was not one of those countries. She gives some reasons why Israel wasn't near the top of that list and why other countries were at the top of the list, and what actually was happening that took Israel back down the list. Of course, Ukraine is being watched very closely. So is Myanmar and Mali. They're being watched very closely. And like I said, other things like India was on the decline, and they fell down the list. Other countries that appeared with the statement, while there have been many concerning deteriorations in situations faced by children in the context of such things as Myanmar, South Sudan, or Burkina Faso, progress made in protecting children was also observed. Notably, countries such as the Central African Republic, Colombia, Iraq, Nigeria, and Yemen, among others, demonstrated protective efforts to safeguard children, including engagement with parties to the conflict. There are a number of statements that were actually in the report, and the report will provide a link at depictions.media for the link to this report. There are some very disturbing things that happen to children with armed conflict, giving us another reason of why maybe we should just stop the wars from happening overall. So why don't we listen to today's show? We're going to start with the permanent representative of the Russian Federation talking about sabotage and who is ultimately responsible for it.
I know. Okay. Let's do it step by step. So, dear colleagues, I just wanted to brief you on the fact that we asked for closed consultations of the Security Council, again on the topic of Nord Stream sabotage. Last time we did it, yes, so we, I don't know, if I am too tall or, okay. So, we asked for these closed consultations again. Last time we did it was less than 2 weeks ago, but during this meeting, last time we reiterated the necessity of the authorities of Germany, Denmark and Sweden to update the Council on the course of their investigation. This haven't been done yet, and in the meantime we have learned that they have organized, the authorities of these countries, in particular Denmark, they have organized the tour of journalists to the place of the sabotage with all the equipment, making pictures, showing certain aspects of the situation, and of course promoting the conspiracy theories that would be aimed at shielding one country which we all well know about. So we think that this is absolutely unacceptable situation, that our country, as a country that is affected by this crime, should be absolutely updated on this situation. Same as Security Council, because as you all remember, during the last discussion, the open briefing, all the members of the Security Council were united in the message that there should be information from these three countries about the course of their national investigation. Some of the members of the Security Council were asking for quick international investigation, same as we were. The others were asking to give some time, some space to these three countries, and the majority of the members of the Council supported this scenario. But we see that after that meeting, nothing has materialized, and we have all the reasons to demand from these authorities to speed up the investigation and to update the Council on the results before we consider further steps how to make those who are behind this crime accountable. Thank you.
Ambassador, on the events of this past weekend, is there any information that Russia's intelligence knew about the mutiny, as your president calls it, before as the Biden administration had? And what is the future of the Wagner Group?
Well, these questions are much above my payroll, as you might understand. I am not dealing with these internal issues. There are a lot of speculations in this regard in Western press. I will also not comment on them. I think all the clarifications have been done, made recently by the president himself. So I don't think that there will be more authoritative source than him.
Ambassador, you called a meeting on Thursday about Ukraine. First, can you tell us what was the point of that meeting?
The The point of the meeting is to analyze the situation with the deliveries of Western armaments and military equipment to Ukraine and how it affects the prospects of finding peace to Ukrainian crisis.
Do you not have a problem, though, arguing anything now in the Security Council about Ukraine, given that your invasion has backfired so spectacularly with a march on Moscow at one point?
I don't see any connection, frankly. This is absolutely internal matter, and really I'm very surprised that you take this kind of logic. This is internal issue, and we settled it.
It's deeply embarrassing, isn't it, though? President Putin declared and condemned a mutiny, and then he's done nothing about the mutineers. He looks very weak now.
I absolutely disagree. I think he looks strong, and our country looks stronger than ever because we were united to repel this mutiny, and if you think otherwise, then I think you might somehow change your optics, because you have maybe a little bit.
One final question, if I may, on the Wagner Group and their activities in Africa, clearly in countries where the Security Council is interested and that are on the Security Council agenda. My understanding is that in both Mali and Central African Republic, the agreement is actually between the Russian Federation and those countries. So will the Wagner Group continue to operate in those two countries?
Frankly, I don't have the data maybe that you have, but I don't have such information. I think you need to ask comments first and foremost to the governments of these countries. This is their sovereign decisions, and I think that the latest events showed clearly that the Wagner Group is detached from the government, and we're not taking decision for this group.
Sorry, Ambassador. But it's still, whether you say you're detached or not, you are a member of the Security Council, and the Wagner Group is operating in those countries. So I'm asking you, can you try and seek clarification of whether the Wagner Group is going to continue its operations? What is your understanding?
I don't have even information that Wagner Group is operating in these countries, because this is a private military company. So how should I have the information about its activities? Same as American colleagues do not have a lot of information, as they say, about activities of different private military companies in the world. So why do you ask me these questions and so insistently? I don't know. I don't see any connection of this situation with the situation in Ukraine, first and foremost. This is our internal matter, which was settled in a very resolute way. And we're absolutely sure that our country has gone from this experience stronger than it was ever, and the president of authority showed to be. I'm sorry, with great respect, don't you abuse
your answer doesn't make sense. The Wagner Group has been enmeshed in the Russian military operation in Ukraine since 2014. They work side by side and have done with your military. And you're telling me the Russian government knows nothing about what the Wagner Group are up to.
But the fact that Wagner Group was making a rebellion against the Russian government, doesn't it show that Russian government was not involved in this situation? Many of Wagner fighters are real patriots of Russia, we admit it, and that's why they were participating in this fight against NATO in Ukraine. That was their deliberate decision, and we respect it, and we hope that there will be others who will be joining our legitimate fight for our freedom and independence. Okay?
Ambassador,
Yeah.
Your mission accused the hosting country, the United States, of incitement of defections. Do you have more details on this? And have you talked to your counterpart of the United States as well as the UN on this issue, and what's their response?
Of course, we raised this issue several times. We all face constant provocations, constant materials from the internet. Persons approaching some of us. Of course, this is very futile attempts. I don't know what they are counting on. This is the breach of diplomatic practice and diplomatic protocol. We are indicating to our American colleagues and to the host country committee that this is absolutely unacceptable.
What's the response from the United States?
The response from the United States? No comment, as usually. When they are embarrassed, they usually do not comment things.
The United Nations.
The United Nations, they, well, kind of an ostrich policy, you know, in this regard. They say this is a bilateral matter, but we do not think so. So we raise it in host country committee, and we will continue to raise it in host country committee bilaterally. And of course, we think that this is absolutely outrageous.
Mr. Ambassador, what is your reaction to the many commentators who have said that what happened over the weekend with the Wagner Group has weakened President Putin, and some commentators have said that it leaves him open to being challenged for the presidency in the next Russian elections upcoming?
I think I already answered this question. The people that are asking this question are obviously not Russian, and they do not understand Russia. Because if they did, they would really see it from absolutely different optics. The country has become more stronger, and the president's support has consolidated, and I think that's quite obvious for everyone who is open-mindedly analyzing Russia, not who has some Russophobic optics. They are, of course, disappointed, and I think that we will continue to disappoint them even more. Yeah.
Going back to the topic of the North Sea and the pipeline, then you say that Germany, Denmark, and Sweden are not informing the Security Council soon enough. Now, did Russia ask to this country directly, bilaterally, to move on the investigation? What was the answer, if you did? And then again on the question of Russian diplomats, your mission has been lamenting with denouncing with the Secretary General that the FBI somehow, some way is harassing you. Can you give us some specific about that? What is really happening? Why you think that you can't do well your job in New York at the moment? Because what's happening?
Well, if I start from your second question, then I can tell you that it can be in different forms. Somebody would approach you in the streets saying that if we want some cooperation on your future, on your brighter future, you know where to find us, trying to get acquainted with our diplomats and with our staff. Sometimes you open Twitter and then you have this popping advertisement that FBI is thinking that you need to have a better future, so you have this or that contact line. But I think you have you can judge by yourself the futility of these attempts from the moment when the special military operation started. As for the first question, yes, we repeatedly approached the three countries asking to be part of the investigation and to update us on the state of the investigation. They declined. We published this correspondence after we had this open meeting in the Security Council, and it's available as a UN document. Those who want to have a copy, they can ask Theodore, and we will share with you this document. It's not a secret. So the outrageous part is that they absolutely deny us any information. They say it's classified. They say that they're dealing with it themselves, and then they organize this kind of tourist tour to the place of the sabotage, inspiring journalists to make some further absurd conspiracy theories, shielding some elephant in the room, as we all understand. So trying to shield responsibility from those who are really culpable of this sabotage. That's what really was behind our desire to discuss this question once again in Security Council. Okay, maybe if it's one more question and no? Okay, then thank you everybody.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. So will you raise the question of Nord Stream again at the Security Council next time?
Absolutely, no doubt about it. We just need to understand really the degree of readiness to cooperate from the three countries in question, and we do not intend to put this question under the carpet. Okay, thank you very much.
Just a technical one. Thursday is in the morning? Afternoon. Okay.
Afternoon.
Thank you. Question.
Take a few days off. All right, good morning, everyone. Is this great? Is everyone here? Good. All right, so I'll read out press elements that were agreed by the members of the Security Council following the closed consultations last Friday. The members of the Security Council met on 23rd June to receive a briefing from the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process tour Wensland and to discuss recent violence in the West Bank upon the request of the UAE, France, and China. The members of the Council expressed sorrow for the loss of civilian lives. They recalled the presidential statement adopted on 20th February 2023, including their call for full respect for international humanitarian law and the protection of the civilian population. They emphasized the obligations and commitments of Israeli and Palestinian authorities to fight and condemn terrorism in all its forms in a manner consistent with international law. They further emphasized the importance of holding accountable those responsible for such acts of violence. The members of the Security Council encouraged additional steps to restore a durable calm and de-escalate tensions and called on all parties to refrain from unilateral actions that further inflame tensions. They further urged for restraint to reduce tension and prevent further escalation. The members of the Security Council committed to remain seized of these issues and look forward to the open briefing today. End of press elements.
Ambassador, in your national capacity, Israel has announced another 5,700 settler homes in the West Bank, and also in recent hours, Prime Minister Netanyahu told the Knesset committee about the Palestinians, we need to eliminate their aspirations for a state. Isn't Israel just showing contempt for the Security Council? And do you need to ask the Israeli ambassador in this meeting whether he really believes in a two-state solution?
The UAE in its national capacity has condemned any settlement expansion, any further settlement activity as endangering the two-state solution. And the UAE is fully committed to the two-state solution underlined in all the various international law elements and UN Security Council resolutions. So our position is clear. The settlements do undermine the viability of the two-state solution, and we will be making that clear also in our statement today.
Question on Mali. The Mali government has obviously requested that the UN peacekeeping mission shut down. I believe the Council is discussing a draft that would end the mission on June 30 and have a 6-month drawdown. Is that still on track to be adopted on Thursday?
The Council are in discussions about the future of the Mali mission. I can't comment on ongoing negotiations, but clearly the request from the Mali government has been taken into account and into consideration, and the mission needs to function there with the full protection of coordination with the relevant authorities. So I think that is being included in the discussion, those elements, but I can't comment on the specifics. And obviously a lot depends on discussions with the UN, with the peacekeeping department on what is needed for a effective and safe and responsible drawdown. So I think those discussions are ongoing, including with regional partners as well. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
Today, the Secretary General's Special Representative on Children in Armed Conflict, Virginia Gamba, whom you know well, and it's the time of year when you know why she is here to talk to you. The report on children in armed conflict has been published as a document today. There are some copies available, so you can have a look at it. And Ms. Gamba will now talk to you about some of the main points of this year's report, and then she'll take your questions. Ms. Gamba, over to you.
Which one do I? This one. Okay, it's late. You're awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. And apologies again, we did have a glitch. The intention was to have it up at 8, so you would have time to read it before this meeting. So I really apologize. My people are in the back. If you would like afterwards for them to give you the email, and then you can send questions once you have time to read the report, they'll be happy to transmit them to me, because it's unfair on you. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So let me start by some of the highlights of the report. As you know, the report covers the year 2022. Just for you to know, the open debate under the presidency of the United Kingdom will occur on the 5th of July in the Chamber of the Security Council. I think while the past month have shown escalation with existing conflicts, as you all know, this report only covers the reporting period, which is from January to December 2022. As always, any subsequent events will be reported next year. There is one caveat for you to know. The report does cover, mostly in the development and concern sections, any mention of any engagement that with the parties to conflict that was commenced in 2022, and the status of that engagement goes all the way, let's say, even to May. And that's just to keep track on the engagements in that section. In 2022, children continued to be disproportionately affected by armed conflict. We had 27,180 grave violations against 18,890 children. About 2/3 of them boys, 1/3 girls, a little bit more than 1/3 girls. We covered 24 situations and one regional monitoring agreement, the Lake Chad Basin, as had been agreed 2 years ago. The lack of respect for international humanitarian law and human rights law had a devastating impact on the protection of children in armed conflict, which resulted in a dire year for children living in situations affected by armed conflict. Therefore, over 18,890 children have been affected at least by one of the 4 individual violations. You know, we have a mix, 4 individual violations, 2 collective violations. The individual ones are recruitment and use, killing and maiming, rape, and other forms of sexual violence and abduction. We are also able to say that at least 2,330 of these children were victims of 2 or more of the 6 grave violations. This is tragic, yet crucial information to have, as this confirms that grave violations are often interlinked. For example, a boy may be abducted and then recruited to fight and end up maimed or killed on the front line. A girl may be recruited to be used, then is raped, and end up killed in an attack on the camp where she is being held. This reinforces the importance to work on the prevention of grave violations and the provision of holistic reintegration support for all children affected by conflict. When we add the number of incidents of attacks on schools and hospitals and the denial of humanitarian access, which are the 2 collective grave violations against children, the number of grave violations reaches more than 27,000. Again, this is only verified information. I want to remind that these numbers are based on the monitoring reporting mechanism verification standard, which is proper to the Children and Armed Conflict mandate and differs from others such as human rights monitoring. Countries that recorded the highest numbers of grave violations in 2022 were the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Israel and the State of Palestine, Somalia, Ukraine, and Syria, while the countries that faced the worst deterioration were Myanmar, South Sudan, and Burkina Faso. The most prevalent violation in 2022 was killing and maiming, with more than 8,600 children killed or maimed. This was followed by recruitment and use of children with more than 7,600, and abduction with more than 3,900. The sharpest increase of the year is on attacks on schools and hospitals, showing a 112% increase from previous years, a staggering 1,846 schools and hospitals were attacked. Rape and other forms of sexual violence registered 1,166 verified violations, but we know this is vastly underreported. Despite not being a listable violation, the denial of humanitarian access remained very high, with 3,931 incidents verified by the United Nations. One wonders if this was a listable violation, whether this would be a lower figure. Although not a grave violation, the widespread military use of schools by both armed forces and armed groups during 2022 is again a very worrisome trend. Schools and hospitals should remain zones of peace. When they are not, they can become targets during fighting between parties to conflict, and children become part of this tragedy. Furthermore, the number of children detained remained high this year again, but decreased in compared to previous years, with 2,496 children deprived of liberty for alleged association with parties to conflict. I would like to remind that the detention of children should only be used as a last resort and for the shortest period. Alternatives to detention should be actively sought and reintegration support provided. Children should not be doubly punished by conflict. What are the changes to the report this year? In Ukraine, the Secretary General decided to list the Russian armed forces and affiliated armed groups under Section B of Annex 2 for attacks on schools and hospitals and for killing of children, in particular through the use of explosive weapons with a wide impact area, including shelling from heavy artillery, multiple launch rocket systems, missiles, and airstrikes in populated areas, which resulted in a very high number of casualties and the destruction of infrastructures. The Russian Federation and affiliated armed groups have been listed under Section B of Annex 2 in consideration of the ongoing engagement they had with me since last year and also following my visit to Russia in May. I am committed to continue this engagement to make sure that measures identified to end and prevent children from grave violations are being implemented. And I note that decreases in these two violations have already started to occur as soon as my engagement commenced in August 2022 to date. The Secretary General decided to also warn the Ukrainian armed forces in Section 5, owing to the high number of children killed and maimed and of attacks on schools and hospitals attributed to them. While we are aware that Ukraine's military actions are in response to Russia's aggression, the CAC mandate applies to all parties to conflict and whether grave violations are committed during offensive or defensive operations. The warning serves to remind Ukraine of the importance to uphold international humanitarian law and international human rights law going forward. The Secretary General will remain attentive to the way Ukrainian forces respond to his request, but I commend already the progress made by the Ukrainian government in taking further steps in protecting children as soon as my engagement with them began last year. In Israel and the State of Palestine, the Secretary General did not list any parties to the conflict. Last year, in his annual report, the Secretary General stated explicitly that, and I quote, should substantial airstrikes and rockets resulting from the May 2021 escalation of hostilities repeat itself in 2022, parties to the conflict should be listed. End of quote. The Secretary General also called on parties to the conflict to engage with me to identify practical measures to protect children and end grave violations. Following my visit to Israel and the State of Palestine, of course Gaza and Ramallah and Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, engagement took place with all parties, including through an exchange of letters, the appointment of focal points by all parties, and the identification of practical measures, including those proposed by the United Nations to end and prevent grave violations against children. We also noted an important decrease in airstrikes by Israeli forces from 598 airstrikes in 2021 to 52 in 2022. The whole purpose of the CAC mandate as given by the Security Council is to engage with parties to create a change in the behavior of parties and strengthen the protection of children. Nonetheless, I am concerned by the continuing high level of grave violations against children, particularly the increasing level of violence in the occupied West Bank, including in East Jerusalem in 2023. Therefore, I will continue my engagement with the parties in order to make sure that the identified measures to end and prevent violations against children are being implemented. Additionally, the Secretary General decided to list the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara under Section A of Annex 2 for the killing and maiming of children in Burkina Faso. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Mouvement du 23 Mars has been listed under Section A of Annex 1 for killing and maiming, rape, and other forms of sexual violence, attacks on schools and hospitals, and abduction. This is the group that recently has also raided the school in Uganda. Mai Zaire has been listed under Section A of Annex 1 for the killing and maiming of children. Twigwanejo has been listed under Section A of Annex 1 for recruitment and use of children. Some parties previously listed had additional violations added to their listings. In Burkina Faso, because of an increase of attacks on schools and hospitals, Yama Nusrat ul Islam wal Muslimin has been listed under Section A of Annex 2 for this violation. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Allied Democratic Forces have been listed under Section A of Annex 1 for rape and other forms of sexual violence. The Coopérative pour le Développement du Congo, CODECO, has been listed under Section A of Annex 1 for the abduction of children. In Myanmar, the Myanmar Armed Forces have been listed under Section A of Annex 1 for attacks on schools and hospitals and abduction, following an increase in these violations. Therefore, today they sit with 5 violations under their name. We also had some delisting, not much, but some delisting in the report. In Iraq, the Popular Mobilization Forces have been delisted for the violation of recruitment and use of children owing to a decrease in this grave violation attributed to them and the signature of an action plan to prevent the recruitment and use of children. I will be following this with a personal visit in November. Additionally, India has been removed from the agenda of CAC, following concrete engagement with my office over the last 2 years. In Yemen, the security belt forces were moved from Annex 1A to Annex B in recognition for their willingness to sign the existing action plan with the Yemen Armed Forces, and because they are embedded in the Yemen Armed Forces, today figure as state forces and not non-state actors. Finally, I want to highlight that the Secretary General has taken the decision to include 2 new situations of concern in the CAC agenda. These are Haiti and Niger. To summarize, despite some progress, children have continued to suffer the consequences of man-made conflict in 2022. But this is not a time to give up. We need to redouble efforts and ensure that we have the resources and support to continue to monitor and report grave violations, provide capacity building, and pursue accountability and prevent all grave violations against children. Because of the word count, our report contains, unfortunately, very limited examples of the suffering of children. We have published today, there are some copies in the back, at the same time as the report, a summary document which includes additional information such as comparisons, information on gender, and individual stories for each grave violations, as well as a useful map for you to have. It is an invitation to look beyond the numbers, and I invite you to have a look at it. Finally, I would like to remind us all that military operations set in motion due to rebellions, offensives, and counteroffensives have led to an increased use of explosive weapons, including with wide impact in populated areas, which resulted in an outrageous number of children being killed and maimed, and a striking increase of schools and hospitals being damaged, denying children education and access to health services. I remind that all parties to conflict are bound by the principles of impartiality, proportionality, distinction, and humanity as per international humanitarian law, and should be at the heart of all military planning and action. Civilian populations, and particularly children, are paying the price of armed conflict. We need to reconsider the value of peace for the sake of our children. Thank you, and I am ready to take some questions.
And before we proceed, I also want to let you know that the good news is that the document is now online, so you can access it off the UN website. I'll turn it over to questions. Yes, James.
On behalf of the UN Correspondents Association, thank you for doing this. James Bayes, Al Jazeera. So I want to press you a bit on why Israel is not listed. You read that quote from last. Could you just read that again, that one line that you read from last year's report?
Should substantial airstrikes and rockets resulting from the May 2021 escalation of hostilities repeat itself in 2022, parties to the conflict should be listed.
So I don't understand why Israel is not listed. There was another conflict in Gaza in 2022. The total number of deaths is less because the conflict in May 2021 was 11 days long. The conflict in August 2022 was 3 days long. But Israel did exactly the same thing. It fired indiscriminately, bombed indiscriminately, and killed children. I don't understand why you don't list them. You made a clear warning, and then you wimped out.
I think it has to do with both the engagement and the numbers. There were specific requests in Section 5 of last year, which was to engage on prevention efforts by all three parties to conflict, Hamas, Jihad Islamic, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Israel forces. That engagement did occur, and by December, all sides had agreed to exchange letters with me with the provision of certain measures that they were willing to start putting into place as soon as the new year started.
But letters don't save children's lives. You know what's going on this year. I know this only covers 2022. Israel's already killed 27 children this year.
Well, this is why we're very worried. As we said, we're very concerned at an escalation that we're noticing this year. But for last year, we have to recognize that between 2021 and 2022, there was a decrease in both the killing and the maiming of children. The killing of children was halved between 78 to 42 last year. And like I said, the airstrikes reduced from 598 to 52. With these figures, the Secretary General had to stay true to his word.
But I still don't understand. They are still killing children in huge numbers. Really, dreadful the figures are. Just because the figures in 2021 were more dreadful because the war lasted slightly longer. And I know your report is only supposed to be for 2022, but you have the benefit of knowing what is coming, and you could have sent a clear warning, a clear signal to Israel that might have saved children's lives by putting them on the list.
I think we have to give time for the measures that we have agreed, both sides have agreed to implement this. Year are put in place.
So
and
we'll give them time, shall we, and just let more children die in the meantime?
I don't think that's a very fair comment. I think what is fair is that never before have all three parties agreed to put their signature behind measures to be put in place to reduce and mitigate the results of these violations against children. So I think we'll just have to wait and see.
Joe?
Yeah, Joseph Klein, Canada Free Press. I just want to get a little more granular here in defining the age range that encompasses the children that you are reporting about. Because, again, in your discussion about Israel and the Palestinians in the West Bank, you seem to lump all children together, killed and maimed by Israeli forces during law enforcement operations by the use of live ammunition, without acknowledging that there have been substantial reports of Palestinian militants going down to the ages of as young as 13 who were engaged in in the violence, shooting, stabbing, and so forth. So they were not innocent bystanders. So I'm wondering to what extent you were able to drill down to see whether and distinguish between children who were innocent civilians versus those who were actually perpetrators and were involved in the exchange of gunfire that occurred, for example, in the West Bank.
Well, this is something that is in a way at the heart of our mandate. For us, the definition of a child is from 0 to 18 years old. And a child is a child is a child, including when they are perpetrators of violence. This is why when we talk about the best principles on detention or deprivation of liberty of anyone between 0 and 18, this is why we advocate very much against things like the death penalty for perpetrators that are children in some situations, like recently in Somalia, in Puntland, where 4 of them were sentenced to death. We say a child is a child. They should be put through juvenile courts. They should be tried as children when they're found to have been guilty. We cannot make a distinction between children that are fighting against armed forces. We think it's regrettable. We understand the situation. We've had this in many situations. We've had this in Yemen because we've had this very much in Afghanistan as well, where the Taliban were known for large numbers of recruitment and use of under 18-year-olds. So for us, a child is a child is a child. A violation will be recorded, even if it's the killing, maiming, or detention of a child that is found guilty of some type of violence or perpetration of an act. There are and there is information in the annual report at times, like I said, we have a problem with the word count, that specifies if a child was maimed when that child was in the course of attacking with a knife somebody. So we do try to give some nuance to this.
Wouldn't it have been helpful to at least acknowledge in the paragraph where you're mostly criticizing Israel for carrying out law enforcement operations, to also note that they were met with rounds and rounds of gunfire from Palestinian militants that included children who were recruited. I know you make a general reference about recruitment, but don't you think in the context here that there should have been acknowledged about the dangers to children, again going down as low as 13 or maybe even younger, who were recruited or who on their own volition put themselves in danger by participating in the exchange of fire and so forth?
I think, I know you received the report very late, but I really entrust that you will read all the paragraph from 85 to 100 that refer to Israel and Palestine, and you will see there are paragraphs appropriate for Israel, which are recommendations for Israel, but there is also paragraph appropriate to the Palestinian groups, particularly the PAJ and Hamas, but also Palestinian authorities, on what is expected of them. And if it's any help, in the measures that we have agreed, they are, as you know, confidential. Whenever we sign a joint action plan or there is an exchange of letters on measures agreed by both parties, I really worked very much on the issue of non-recruitment and use of children below 18 from both Hamas and PIJ. I also, for example, asked that no ammunition or weapons would be ever stored in any tunnel, let's say, underneath a school in Gaza, or be placed in such a way that any returning fire would invariably hit children. On the other hand, with Israel, there are mentions in the report already of the many activities and actions that they're prepared to undertake. Perhaps some of the more representative actions that they are prepared to undertake is to revise the standard rules or aggregate specific rules of engagement in special operations that would govern the use of live ammunition when the targets are suspected minors. Also, we worked very hard in trying to speed up the granting of medical permits of almost 3,000 violations attributed, or 1,800 violations attributed to Israel, are delays in the granting permits for children to leave Gaza for medical treatment. And in some cases, this results in death. And so we are working on trying to speed up the process of complying with permits. There are a number of measures that both sides have agreed to do. I have to say, though, I am very concerned, not just at the first 3 months of this year, what we're seeing mostly in East Jerusalem and in the West Bank, and we're keeping a very sharp lookout for these issues. I'm very concerned at the increase in the use of firearms by civilian populations. There seems to be an influx of illicit firearms, particularly in that vicinity. There seems to be a use of social media that we cannot get our head around, where children might be incited. And it is not clear who the main inciting agent might be. But I think this is happening. At the same time, there is a very big increase in killing and maiming attributed to the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and it's mostly through their reduction. Airstrikes, sending rockets out, and these falling short and falling in Palestinian territory in Gaza, and as a result maiming some children. We are discussing all of these issues, and we will continue to do so. But I think it might be of interest to everybody that where I am personally interested this year is to look at the emergence of new armed groups in this situation. We're trying to keep a very close tab on settlers, and we're trying to keep a very close tab on any other armed group that might be appearing or showing, particularly in the West Bank. Hopefully by the end of the year we'll have more clarity, but we're determined that the measures that have been agreed to be put in place by all three parties be done. You will notice in this annual report that the Secretary General has taken a decision which sits under the section of Israel and Palestine under the developments and concerns. And he has says in paragraph 96, I request that my special representative coordinate with the United Nations the strengthening and broadening of that working group to cover Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory. So one of the problems we have with monitoring reporting is the weaknesses of the monitoring reporting working groups. And in this case, the Secretary General took a decision to order its strengthening, which I will start doing now that the report is public. Thank you.
Abdulhamid.
Thank you, Madam Gamba. This is Abdulhamid Sayam from the Arabic daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi. Last year I asked you if you feel comfortable with this report not listing Israel, and if you sleep comfortably at night seeing all these atrocities. Now the situation is worse, okay, as you know. The five major countries who abuse the rights of the children are as follows. First, Palestine and Israel with a 3,133. Second, Somalia. Third, Syria. Fourth, Ukraine. And fifth, Afghanistan. So Israel and Palestine is number one as far as I just skimmed through the report. So that means the country that violates the rights of the children and in all categories, as you listed, is Israel. And yet it's not listed. Not even the settlers there are two groups who are listed as terrorist groups. The Guards of the Hills and the Revenge group who are launching all these attacks on Palestinian civilians. Now, how can you explain that? And the second, how could you praise a country that cut down on its air raids from 500 down to 52 when its air attacks should not be used at all for civilians under occupation for 56 years? These are civilians. They don't have air force. And yet you're praising them and you're using as a category for not listing Israel. This is unbelievable. I want you to give me a lengthy answer, the way you did just before, about how can you justify not listing Israel and these settlers in your report. Thank you.
Very well, thank you very much. I remember well the questions you posed last year, of course, and this year we are back on the same type of questions. I think I'm not going to repeat what I have just said, but I do want to say one thing that is of interest. The figures that you just read, talking about the totality of violations, include about 1/3 or 1/4 of that. I had put it in a piece of paper and I cannot find the little piece of paper here. I would say the largest number within that large number is denial of humanitarian assistance. Denial of humanitarian assistance is a non-listable violation. This is why I said at the very beginning in my statement that my personal opinion is that denial of humanitarian assistance should be a listable violation, because we're seeing an increase on that in all 24 situations. And I believe this happens because there is no deterrence against those that deny humanitarian assistance, whether it be in Somalia, in Yemen, or in Israel. And if you consider that is not a listable violation, then it does not become the number one in your list. So I would dispute that Israel-Palestine is the number one on your list on that basis. But I think nothing that I tell you will make you feel better about the fact that Israel is not listed. I think on the settlers, I informed just now that we are monitoring now very seriously. As of January this year, we're seeing an increase in, like I said, I think we're about to see different armed groups appear and have a personality. And so we're keeping a very close look at that. I'm also hoping that through the strengthening of the working group on monitoring and reporting in Palestine and Israel, we will be able to have stronger figures verified at the end of the year. Thank you very much.
So the settlers' violence last year, 2022, you think worth not mentioning in this report? It was okay. But this year is increasing. That's how I understand what you have just said.
Nothing is okay. Nothing is okay. What can be okay about any child suffering as a consequence of protracted conflict of any type? So no, let us keep this in perspective. This is the monitoring reporting mechanism. It follows rules. You know the rules. The Secretary General takes decisions based on figures. The fact remains that last year's figures are less than the year before, and that the parties have agreed to engage. So this is the reason why they're not being listed this year. But there's nothing more I can say to that effect.
Okay, we've got a bunch of questions. Gregory?
Thank you very much. Gregory Sapornikov of TASS News Agency. A paragraph 341 says a huge number of cases of killing children, and as well as by the attacks on hospitals and schools by Ukrainian forces. At the same time, Secretary General made almost identical calls on Russia and to Ukraine to abide international humanitarian law and to take measures to prevent violations. So at the same time, why the Secretary General not listed the Ukrainian forces to the list of parties who conducted violations affecting children? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think that it was a very important decision that he took to issue a warning in Section 5 of the report. This is normally the listing section, and it is really a very serious warning. I think when one looks at the figures of last year, 2022, as attributed to the parties to conflict, there are two things that are interesting. The first one is that the Russian Federation is not cited alone. It's the Russian Federation and affiliated armed groups. They are under the umbrella, and the responsibility and accountability is provided to the state. Therefore, it is the Russian Federation and affiliated armed groups. I think this is something that we could discuss to some level. If we look at the violations that were committed last year as verified, I have the figures with me. For killing and maiming, the totals against the Russian Federation and affiliated armed groups was 658 for the whole year. The totals, again, attributed to the Russian Federation and affiliated armed groups was 480. When you come to Ukraine, the killing and maiming attributed to them for the whole year was 255, about 40% of the amount presented in the first part. And attacks on schools and hospitals, 212, again 50% less than the ones on the Russian Federation and affiliated armed groups. So I think it represents very much the scale, and the warning is there because it's very close to a situation where Ukraine would have to be listed, and they're being given a warning. Having said that, I think I insist. You have to understand, Ukraine was not a situation of concern until July last year. The reason why the Ukraine became a situation of concern was precisely because of these types of figures. In the first 6 months of last year, before there was a situation of concern, already there were 386 children killed and maimed, and 386 schools and hospitals that had been damaged or hurt in the fighting attributed to the Russian Federation and affiliated armed groups. By the time we started our engagement, I have to say both sides immediately answered my call for engagement as early as August last year. Since then, we have both sides been working firmly towards 2 joint action plans. Both of them have now been agreed with both sides. It is right now sitting in the capitals for final signature. But the willingness of both sides to start immediately trying to decrease the number of violations by being more careful on the way that they were engaging in military operations became evident early on. If you look at the quarters 3 and 4 of last year for the attributions against the Russian Federation and affiliated armed groups, you will see a decrease in those last 6 months of the year from 658, from 386 to 272 killed and maimed, and in schools and hospitals from 386 to 94. It's a significant decrease. When we go to the first quarter of this year, the decrease continues. I fully expect that when the joint action plans are signed, this will happen. In the case of Ukraine, the same thing was true. And they had 196 in the first quarter, killed and maimed, against 59 in the second part of the year, after we started the engagement. And 159 schools and hospitals in the first 6 months of the year, and then 53 in the second part of the year. So we are seeing that the engagement is beginning to work, and both sides are very careful. But the report does not just cover from the moment there is a situation of concern. It has to cover the whole year. So it is retroactive all the way to January. And with these figures, it was impossible not to list the Russian Federation and affiliated armed groups, whereas it was possible to give a warning to Ukraine that these figures must continue to lower. In fact, both sides must continue to lower, and I am confident that both sides will if they continue the engagement with me. Thank you.
Thank you. This is Arun Lewis from INS. This is regarding what you said about removing India from the list. Could you please expand on that, the reason for it, and what is kind of interaction? And also, in the last year's report, you had mentioned armed insurgent groups operating there. So how does it work in terms of their operations? Thank you.
For the last 2 years, we have been working very closely with India. India decided to start a prevention engagement. As you know, it's always very difficult when you're in a situation of concern with no listed parties. There is no need or obligation to have a joint action plan to be able to consider a delisting because you're not listed. So all you have left is a prevention plan. And India came forth 2 years ago to our offices and to our people on the ground, the resident coordinator in Delhi, as well as the UNICEF representative in the country, and indicated that they were ready to start engagement to see if they can put in place measures that could be sustained through time that would allow for them to be removed. So the measures, some of them, like I said, we have confidentiality on the exact terms and roadmaps and date lines of actions in each one of our engagements with any party to conflict. But in paragraph 348 of the annual report, you can have a glimpse of the type of measures that had been agreed. Among them, I call upon India to implement the remaining measures identified in consultation with my special representative and the United Nations, including the training of armed and security forces on child protection, the prohibition of the use of lethal and non-lethal force on children, including by ending the use of pellet guns, ensuring that children are detained as a last resort and for the shortest appropriate period of time, and to prevent all forms of ill treatment in detention, and the full implementation of the Juvenile Justice, Care and Protection of Children Act and the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act. Therefore, these are some of the measures that have been put in place. We have been working with them very closely on this pattern. And you have to also remember that this is not like a movie. The annual report depicts a moment in time and a decision taken for a number of reasons. Mostly the reasons for decisions have to do with patterns that are escalating patterns or decreasing patterns. Decreasing patterns must be accompanied with commitments that are full in writing and formal about the willingness to put in place measures to better protect children. When these types of formal commitments are put in place, and then there is a pattern of decrease following that against that party, then the Secretary General can take decisions. But if there's something that occurs, let's say this year or next year, that is a peak of violence for whatever reason, then all of these parties and all of these countries can return to the CAC agenda. It's not a one-off. You have to sustain it. You're always in peril of being called back into the annual report, both in its narrative or to be relisted. It has happened before with parties that had been delisted and were relisted because they had abandoned the obligations that they had agreed upon. So we will wait to see if India can continue the commitments that they have put in place and that we are supporting.
Toshi?
Thank you, Madam.
Okay, so Virginia Gambia, she sets the standards with these writings about war crimes and the effects that it has on children and the countries that need to be monitored and watched because of the harm that they're doing to children and targeting children and putting children in harm's way. And we hear a report just before that about things that are happening on the Gaza Strip and with Palestine. Israel isn't on the list of watched countries when we see the conflict between them and the Palestinians on the Gaza Strip. Why aren't they on the list? And a reporter in the press conference asked that question. Why aren't they on the list? Why shouldn't we be watching them? Virginia does answer the question because there's a standard that is missing that should be in there. Well, why isn't that standard in there? And why isn't the Secretary General making sure that all the standards that can show harm to children, how children are losing their childhood because of armed conflict, why isn't it in there? Some good questions. Why aren't we looking closer at it? And how do we inspire our global leaders to look closer at everything that harms our children? Because it doesn't matter that that child is Palestinian or Israeli and I'm in Canada. They're still part of the human race, and being part of the human race, it still makes them our children. Why we need to protect all of the children around the world from armed conflict. One of the best ways to do that, I still keep going on about this, one of the best ways to get on with that, to protecting children from armed conflict, is not to have armed conflict to begin with. Find a table, some chairs, and talk it out. Sit down and talk it out. If you have to lock yourselves in the room as global leaders until you figure it out, and have food slid under doors until it's all figured out, that we come to some agreement over the conflict without firing a shot, without dropping a bomb, without the drone strikes, without missiles, all those sort of things that do harm to people, that do harm to our children. If we can figure it out without all that, why aren't we doing that? That's what we need to see happen. So, we'll have more to come on human rights and how war affects human rights and how different issues affect human rights. Here on Depictions Media Radio, and you've been listening to Policy and Rights, and I've been your host, Michael Clogs. Find that subscribe button wherever it is, and after you find that subscribe button and you hear something about an issue, write to your government and tell them. Tell them that we need to fix these situations. Anyway, thank you for listening today. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.